Welcome to episode 47 of Liquid Velvet Literature. But the harder he swam, he still could not break free from the tugging that pulled at his mouth. We have a really good show today, really jazzed about the requests, so without further ado, let's jump into those requests. Okay, and let's go to our spotlight page. This is BurialandUtopia with Wag Spill, and anyone who watches the channel knows I love me some BurialandUtopia. One of my favorites, been on the site since the site started pretty much, and I just love the heart in this man, so let's do this. The puncture pulse of time replenishes thee, nothing but a burst balloon so many are, while I orbit around the longitudes and latitudes of he and she. They whipped me well. I am so obsessed with they compounded that somewhere I lost I. Walk I do, breathe I do. Morbid existence type calls do exist. Necessary pessimism is such a buzzkill. Why don't you look at his stiff tail wagging? Why don't you do something? Why don't you laugh at his stiff tail wagging? Smell spices from the broth, unteach and teach. You be better, dear damned son. Yeah, that's really fucking good. Thank you, man. And this is by BeulaDaisle, one of the new kids on the block, technically still. Kitchen employee. Walking opposite the moon, our hopes inside its fleshy pockets, spotlighting teeth in the whites of eyes, wide and vacuumed, all while the city below dissolves in its particles overnight, composting the garbage dump Govindas, dumping its shadow into the sewers we created out of shaving cream, pet fish, and semen. I'm standing outside, my outline, drying my heart out in the pages of a spineless book, wringing chicken blood from kitchen rags with arms cut deep in seasoned salt, as rats bathe in the shadow of the redwoods, anticipating angelhood. I am spitting broken teeth like stars onto the soil, planting love into the dead grass. I am meat fooled into repose. Flies in the kitchen of heat and stink. I am your substance. Walk along my curves and corners, ingesting crumbs and morsels that fall misgiven on my clothes, bloating the puddles of nervous ants drowned in the quiet of oak tree worship. And it's all a familiar comfort, an easy dream, teaching me the dark of its corners, like this hole in my sock. And I've been here before, focusing on the cardboard box of whatever punched out, winking its flaps at me, knocking on some memory in an eternal midnight page. Flicking away a spent cigarette, looking for the sun to come on stage again tomorrow, illuminate my dimming thoughts, my beads of sweat and knuckle scars. And ecstasy hangs in the mind, tricking darkness upon my dream wall. Yeah, no wonder. Yeah, that's a really, I could say so much about this. Let's see, I mean, there are so many good lines in this, I can't even start to comment on one. Thank you for this BeulaDaisle. This is beautiful. And this one is LDW with Uncle Noah. Uncle Noah's corncob pipe steams out smoked sagacity as he tells me, time is a cumbersome leech, an evaporating haze of television snow, That was a kick drum assassin between the weary, flickering bonfire of heart-bowed eyes, so the penalty of life is being alive. But I answer that I'm not so sure. For his life is but mangled symphonies, all bruised and tinny, shuddering in the thunder of Leviathan's steps. Who would remember and who could forget? But he retorts between locomotive puffs and wicker chair cheeps. The youth of my son climbed and slept upon the lazing floors of cloudy heights, a shelter from fever and black dog nights. And so I let God whisper something solemn to him as I walk away, and whatever he said was lost to the wind and carried away. Yeah, I told you guys this was going to be a good show. These pieces of work are just holy fuck. And it just keeps going. Thank you, LDW. And like a welcomed reoccurring nightmare of beauty, this is Area Man with Eye of the Dodo. The dope fiends around here and everywhere else I have been are just as tedious as everyone else I meet nowadays, and that is why I resent them, because if one cannot summon the courage to be a genuine piece of shit lunatic while living behind a leaky dumpster, what the hell are they gonna do when times really get tough? Yeah, that's a good piece. David Burdett, 632024. That's a good piece. Thank you, Area Man. Aha. And this is Mamba with the penultimate piece called Phantom. While widows weep by the old St. Francis, a procession of dark drags in red lipstick kick up the dust from Katrina, powdering their twisted faces with narcolepsy and narcotics, laced Viagra and Voodoo. Inside there is a silent hum of hallelujah and warm bread stacked in cold cardboard boxes. Stained glass and suicide, the pity alters the ions in the air as the thick fingers of the priest pull at his collar as he prays silently and struggles to breathe, choking on the thick hypocrisy in the hot Louisiana air. The line will end at the red string, and all of the marchers will fall like the fools they are, and the widows will fix another seat for the wounded at the old St. Francis on State Street. I've read this poet over the years, and I have to say this is one of my favorite things that she has written, and the funny part is she would probably disagree, but aren't we all our own worst fucking critics? I know I am. Yeah, this is really well done, Mamba. Thank you for this. We got some comments. Dave K says, for fuck's sakes, laced Viagra and Voodoo and stained glass and suicide are beautiful. You are a madame of words, and language owes you a cut for this arrangement. Kudos. Yeah, that's well said. And then Nancy KZ says, Dave hit a few of the great lines. I also love this one, silent hum of hallelujah and warm bread. Gorgeous use of language, and the imagery is gritting and gripping. It is, both those things. And then Mamba says, such kind words, thank you. And then Dr. Semicolon says, felt the humidity with this one. Mamba, been there, done that. Yeah, that's, I have to agree with Dave K and Nancy on that one as well. And it's also humid down there. Everybody knows that. And, but it's true. And I remember I lived there before Katrina hit. And I can taste this poem. I can taste the air in this poem. And I can feel it. And this is really good. And this will close us out today. This is WilkinsonRiling with 7 Seconds in Hell. Garrett Lippman was thinking he must know how Adam felt in the Garden of Eden when Eve tempted him with the apple. After all, the fruit was plucked from the tree of knowledge, and insider knowledge meant everything to a young day trader at Goldman Sachs. It wasn't just the attempt at insider trading that had placed Garrett in his current predicament. As with most things in his life, it was poor decision-making that put him in a situation where he had no idea how to extract himself in this singular moment of time, where he finds himself staring into a shock of blinding light. All Garrett could think about were the events leading up to this very pulse-pounding second. Garrett lived in a midtown apartment that could just as well have been called a walk-in closet with futon and hot plate. With rent of $2,200 a month for the 13th floor walk-up and his $100,000 a year income as a junior trader, Garrett didn't feel he was exactly crushing it. To make matters worse, his alarm clock failed. He awoke already late for his job at the financial market 30 minutes away by subway train. Garrett owned one used Armani suit, charcoal gray with 2 ties of similar gray tones, 2 Van Heusen white dress shirts, and a pair of boot black Valeska shoes with complementing socks. His current wardrobe hung from the frame of his 10-speed bike mounted on the wall, a relic from his days as a bike messenger. Garrett could not remember the last time he trucked the bicycle down the long flight of stairs to take it out for a spin. With no time to shower, several articles of set clothing were already on him as he bounded down the stairwell, rushing to get to work. The suit jacket was the last to join the rest of his ensemble as he powered out the front door of his building and raced toward the subway. Today was supposed to be a very big day. At work that day, Garrett was going to manage a Sunshine Index fund while his boss was conferencing out of town. It was called the Sunshine Index as it was made up from the portfolios of residents from the state of Florida. The fund represented government workers, teachers, nuns, and retirees, even law enforcement pensions. His job for the day was to do nothing, simply watch the fund. Again, do nothing, unless he saw any wild or even subtle fluctuations that needed to be brought to his boss's attention. Then he was to contact his boss immediately. On any given day, Garrett was useless without his coffee. He would have to buy it now and drink it on the train. Luckily, the fact he was already 3 minutes into rush hour meant there was no line. He snagged his venti, ignoring that they wrote Gary on the cup. If there was a Gary back there, he was shit out of luck as far as Garrett was concerned. He was already through the turnstile, high-stepping for the waiting subway car. The activity by the subway car was like a frenetic beehive as commuters were disembarking or piling in with a simultaneous herd mentality. By the time Garrett arrived, the doors started to close. He yelled for someone to hold them open, but the office workers just stared at him, a zombie look on their faces. They were often the type of jobs spent in cubicles of monotony that give one the feeling of being among the living dead. The train pulled away as Garrett skidded to a stop. The lid to his coffee flew off, spilling hot coffee on his wrist. Garrett moved the dripping coffee from hand to hand like a hot potato. In his balancing act, some coffee spilled onto his dress shirt, leaving a stain. Damn it. Garrett was about to unleash a tirade of swear words one might hear from a sea captain with Tourette's. Late for work? The voice was sultry with a hint of a teasing tone. Garrett spun on his heels, spilling more coffee. On the platform against the wall stood a small old-fashioned wooden kiosk painted blood red, almost like a phone booth from hell but slightly larger. On the display, several electronic gizmos were offered for sale. Everything from burner phones to smart ones, including tablets and watches. Garrett was sure this booth wasn't here yesterday. He was surprised he was able to take in all of his minute observations at a glance, especially since the booth was manned by a woman. Not just any woman. This young woman was absolutely stunning. Relaxed, she posed on her chair by the kiosk like Mrs. Robinson in The Graduate. Garrett guessed, standing, she'd be about 5'9", with sensual curves, lacking any sharp tangents. Her breasts were easy to describe. Perfect. Her body seemed to be in motion even though she was sitting still. Her hair, wine red, hung past her shoulders. Garrett stared into her eyes, unsure if he was detecting a yellow ring within the reptilian green of the irises that orbited her pupils. When she smiled, her ivory white teeth shone. 2 canines peeked out from inside her cherry red smile. "Perhaps I can help you with that, Garrett." It wasn't a whisper, but it felt like one. Garrett almost dropped his coffee. "How do you know my name?" She placed an elbow on a knee and her head into her hand while the other waved him off. "Oh, I know a lot about you, Garrett Lippman. For instance, I know you work at Goldman Sachs." "Who are you and how do you know me?" he said with a mix of intrigue and growing unease. She smiled, tilting her head back for a laugh. "Your access card, silly, is hanging around your neck." Garrett looked down, snapping up his access card that hung from a lanyard. With it, he gained access to the elevator that took him to the 70th floor in Goldman Sachs Trading Center. Feeling silly, Garrett shook his head. "Just the same, you've got pretty damn good eyesight." "I do, and I can see that you are late. I have just the thing for you." The woman turned to some items hanging from peg holes and removed a smartwatch. She spun back to Garrett with the smile the Cheshire Cat would envy. She continued, "A special watch for a special man." It was a golden Apple Watch with a honeycomb band and bejeweled frame. Garrett thought it must easily be a $1,000 watch. It looked even more stylish than his boss's $10,000 Rolex. Definitely an eye-catcher. Garrett stuttered, I can't. I'm sorry. You know my name. What's yours?" "Eve." Eve gently took a hold of Garrett's wrist and laid the watch across. "It's perfect." "I'm sorry, Eve. I can't afford that." "Of course you can. We have a very generous payment plan." She started to attach the watch. Garrett pulled his wrist away. "No, I'm sorry. I can't. I have to get going. Like you said, I'm late." She cooed. "You've got 10 minutes before the next subway train arrives. Let me show you the watch's amazing features." "I can't." "Relax, Garrett." Her voice gentle as a mother's kiss. Garrett felt all the anxiety escape his body via his shoulders. Eve set his coffee down and took hold of his wrist once again. Garrett never felt her slip the smartwatch on. He only realized it was in place when he looked from her eyes back to his wrist. His mouth formed a whistle as he took in the beauty of the device. The gold band sparkled and the jeweled frame screen was a rich obsidian color. With her thumb, Eve pressed a button, turning the watch on. Garrett was already well ahead of the watch in that department. A half-dozen electronic icons took their place on the watch screen like soldiers awaiting orders. "This watch can measure your heart rate." Eve pressed the heart icon. A diagnostic graph appeared showing his pulse rate and O2 level. "Right now it's pretty high, wouldn't you say?" Garrett's cheeks flushed red. He was lost in her eyes. He gathered himself. "I did just run for the train, you know." He continued to search for an explanation. "And I am late for work." "Ah, yes. About that. Check this out." Eve's thumb dialed the digital crown of a watch. One app closed. A second app, showing a quarter-moon graphic, opened. "This app measures your sleeping patterns. You can get an idea if you're getting the right amount of sleep. Plus, check this out." She tapped the screen. "You can set an alarm and the phone actually taps you awake." Garrett felt a tapping vibration on his wrist from the watch. "I'll admit that's cool, but this is way out of my budget." "You work in finance, right? This app gives you up-to-the-minute stock readouts. It connects to the same high-speed frequency trading systems companies like your Goldman Sachs are connected to. It's state-of-the-art." This tidbit got Garrett's interest. He took a closer look with Eve encouraging him. Go ahead, ask it about a stock. Just speak into the watch. Garrett raised the watch to his mouth. Okay, Apple Inc. Instantly, a stock readout appeared giving the real-time animated trading price. Garrett noticed a graph in the corner of the screen. What's that? Eve grinned. I told you it uses the same HFT that the big financial hedge funds use. It taps into their AI-infused algorithm and predicts a future price in nanoseconds. Garrett was impressed. I can do that from my desk because we're tapped into huge proximity server farms. Seeing that ability on this watch is incredible. Garrett noticed another icon. It was the image of a clock face circled in red with a slash cutting through the center. What's this? Don't touch that, Eve warned. Garrett looked at her confused. Her smile morphed into the kind of look a person gives when sharing a secret they only know. Until I show you just how special this watch is. She stood and sidled up closer to Garrett. He could feel the warmth of her body. This button allows you to pause time, for 7 seconds to be exact. A bell went off in his head. Garrett's skepticism leapt forward. What the hell are you talking about? I see I'm going to have to demonstrate. May I? Eve held her hand out for the watch. Garrett gave it over. She slid it on. It really is sharp-looking, isn't it? Eve took a step back and placed a finger to the watch. Okay, ready? Garrett nodded. From his point of view, Eve disappeared. He looked left and right. Where had she gone? Right behind you, her sultry voice said invitingly. Garrett turned to see she was smiling like a kitten who just caught a mouse, but he wasn't buying it. It's a trick of some kind. You hypnotized me. What about your coffee? She pointed to his coffee cup on the kiosk counter. He turned to look. 1 second it was there, the very next it vanished. He spun back around to Eve. She was taking a sip. Espresso macchiato. Nice. Eve stepped forward, handed Garrett his coffee, and placed the watch back on his wrist. Why don't you give it a try? She said, taking the drink back. Garrett held up the watch and ready to press the icon. He was nervous and confused. Go ahead, Eve encouraged. It can't hurt you. What do I do with 7 seconds? You'll figure something out, I'm sure. With that, Garrett pressed the app. He watched the smartwatch countdown and large red numerals go from 7 to 1. He hadn't moved. The countdown ended. Eve sighed. Try again, Garrett. This time make use of that time. She pointed to the watch. Remember, time is money. Garrett pressed again. He looked around the station. People were frozen mid-walk. Papers floated in space. Everything was still and quiet. Then, looking at Eve, he could only think of one thing to do. Garrett stepped up to Eve and stole a kiss. He stepped back as the clock ran out without a second to spare. Eve, noticing no change other than the eye blink, seemed exasperated. Garrett, this isn't going to work unless you do something with your time. Garrett smiled and held up his coffee cup. Before the last few seconds of his time traveling expired, he had thought to take it back. He took a sip. Eve was pleased. Do you believe me now? Garrett did believe her, and his mind was already racing ahead. What he could do with an extra 7 seconds on the trading floor could make him a billionaire and a Wall Street legend in a very short amount of time. These thoughts were interrupted as the next train arrived at the station. So would you like the watch? She asked. Very much so. Take it. It's yours. Go. You'll miss your train. Garrett was lost in a cascade of dopamine-enriched thoughts. In his brain, he was already filthy rich with the sensual Eve as his girlfriend, or one of many. He couldn't wait to get to work. The doors to the cars were closing. Garrett pressed his smartwatch. Time froze. In 5 seconds, he was aboard the train. Another 2 and the doors closed. He looked back. Eve was gone. The kiosk was gone. He checked to make sure the watch was still there and he hadn't been hallucinating. Then he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Eve. She was frowning. Aren't you forgetting something? He figured she must have followed him on board. What? Her frown reversed. Eve held up a red pen and a sales receipt. You forgot to sign the sales contract. What? How much is the watch? Why don't you worry about that after you make your first $1 million? She handed him the pen and paper and offered him her back to use for him to sign the contract. Oh, and Garrett? We offer no warranty. Garrett signed the form. Eve used his back to stamp it with a notary stamp. The train arrived at the next station. Eve folded the contract and placed it safely between her ample breasts. This is my stop. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Lippman. She stepped off the train, and remember what I said, time is money. With that, the doors closed and Garrett Lippman was off to a future that, at times, would feel like it was coming 7 seconds at a time. Garrett arrived at work a full hour and 15 minutes late. The stock market had been going through a flurry of activity since early morning. The Dow was climbing, expecting to reach 40,000. Garrett's computer was already on, thanks to Simone, his boss's secretary. Garrett thanked her for not reporting him late, and in his mind added her to his list of conquests to be made once he struck it rich. He dropped into his chair and immediately began to analyze the funds attracting the most activity. He set the Sunshine Index Fund off onto his side monitor. There was a frenzy of activity in the Commodities Fund. A new pipeline was being voted on. Garrett checked the algorithm and it seemed to be hedging upwards. He watched it tick up, then down a point, then up again. He waited for the next uptick and hit the time pause button on his smartwatch. Everything on the 70th floor came to a halt. Garrett's mouse circling his pad was the only thing moving. It took him 5 seconds to move the Sunshine Fund into the Commodities Index Fund. Time started again. Garrett watched as the next uptick doubled the value of the Sunshine portfolio. Based on the size of the transaction, he had just made a $10 million commission. He hit the time pause button again and quickly sent the fund back to its original setting in his conservatively managed index. At the end of the 7 seconds, Garrett leapt from his chair and shouted out in joy. Everyone on the floor turned, then froze. Garrett had pressed his watch again, taking his seat hoping no one saw his display of euphoria. Garrett then noticed volatile activity in the real estate index fund. The arrow was snaking up high, then dropping low, then back to high. Similar to the commodities fund, but bigger dips. The algorithm on his watch predicted a spike upwards. Garrett was ready to blow things sky high. He hit pause and shifted the Sunshine Fund over. 7 seconds later, the graph began to trend south. It dropped lower and lower. Garrett watched in horror on both his computer screen and watch face, the value of the Sunshine Fund plummeting in free fall. Someone was shorting the real estate market. Garrett needed to stop the bleeding. The 7 seconds were up and the losses continued. Garrett went into a panic, then realized he still controlled time. He would just shift the fund to other hedge indexes and play it the same way as his first attempt. Garrett looked at his watch. His jaw dropped. The power died. The watch face went blank. Garrett was out of his chair, leaving it spinning. He needed to find Eve. The rest of the afternoon, Garrett searched the entire subway system, riding train after train in the oppressive heat of the summer New York City transit system. After 3 hours, Garrett found Eve at her kiosk in the Hell's Kitchen part of town. Garrett ran up, waving the watch. "Eve, the watch, it's got no power. I think it's broken. You have to fix it." Eve held up the contract. "I told you, no warranty." Garrett snarled. "You bitch, do you know what you did to me?" She sneered. "But what I can do is sell you a new battery, but this will cost you more. Your first purchase cost you your character. This will cost you your soul." She held up the battery. Garrett had no time to argue. "Give me the damn thing." Garrett signed the new contract. Eve placed it with the other contract between her breasts. "I love it when I get a repeat customer." She inserted the battery and powered the watch up, handing it back to Garrett. "Time is money." Garrett checked the stock readout. The Sunshine Index Fund had lost 3/4 of its original morning value. It was only 3 p.m. There was still enough time to fix this by 4 p.m. when the trading day closed. Garrett had one more thing he needed to take care of. He pressed a 7-second pause. Garrett kissed Eve for a final time, then crossed the platform to wait for his train. The train was coming. Garrett turned back and called out to Eve. She looked up. He held up the 2 contracts. Eve looked down between her breasts to see they were gone. Garrett smiled. He had lifted them during his 7-second farewell kiss. He tore them up, scattering them to the hot tunnel wind. The train was almost at the station when Garrett heard Eve's sultry voice in his ear. "Sorry, Garrett. All sails final." She was right behind him. Garrett wondered how did she get there so fast. Eve held up her own Apple Watch and smiled an evil smile. With a mighty shove, Eve pushed Garrett onto the tracks, the train mere seconds away from hitting him. He hit the pause button one last time. Garrett Lippman spent the last 7 seconds of his life with his most recent moments flashing before his eyes, wishing he had more time. What a story woven here. And the PM admin says nice with an ellipsis. WilkinsonRiling says, "Thanks, appreciate you taking time to read. I know it was more than 7 seconds. Mariah, no surprise she likes this. Wow, this was a mind movie. Fantastic, right? Yeah, she's right. Both accounts, she's right on both those. WilkinsonRiling says, thank you. And, I love these long narrations. I love these long form narrations on the channel here, on the show. And speaking of that, Huckleberry Who is one of our writers who I love to read his longer stories. And he says, very cool story. That's a big compliment. And WilkinsonRiling says, glad you liked it, Huckleberry. Check out some of my earlier short stories if you get a chance. Thanks for the like. And then El Curioso says, love that. He thanks El Curioso. And then Ditas John, another one of our legends, says, great story. To like, Ditas John. So all of these writers, this is high acclaim for this story. And it's a very beautifully, classically told story. Would you sell your soul? Would you take that deal? Be tempting at times, couldn't it? All right. Let me get out of this. And that's going to wrap today. Thank you for being here, and thank you again to all the artists featured on the show today. What a flawless cast of 6, right, for the show. I mean, all the writing on the site is so damn good, but this show for me was fun to read these. And going back to WilkinsonRiling, thank you again, Area Man, Mamba, LDW, BurialandUtopia, and BeulaDaisle. They were all such solid, definitive pieces of work that it just made my whole day not so fucking horrible here in the hot African heat. So I'm going to get out of here. And before I go, I'll say, if you like to read or write, go to thepros.com, read or write, inspire, be inspired. I'm sure you all read the news or watch the news or whatever. Everything's pretty fucked right now. And I think that right now is a great time to write something raw and true, or just something raw and good to read. Move somebody in the right way. I'm going to get out of here and take good care.